So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong and Plutora. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning. We've got an exciting panel today, but first I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. First, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, we'd like you to go ahead and send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which you can find on the right side of your screen. That's also where you'll find the chat tab, and that's where we want you to get to know your fellow audience members. Let us know your thoughts throughout today's webinar. Maybe tell us about your next vacation, or maybe where you're tuning in from. We do have two polls throughout today's program, slides 4, slides 10. So keep an eye out for those. We do want your participation there. You'll also find a copy of the slides available for download in the handout section. And of course, before we close, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around. Our topic is efficiency or effectiveness. Why choose? Double down with SRE and VSM. And I'm joined by Helen Beal, Chief Ambassador at DevOps Institute, and Bob Davis, Chief Marketing Officer at Plutora. Helen, Bob, thank you both so much for joining me. Helen, why don't you take it away from here?
Thanks, Cody, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and meet you all. We are getting you warmed up in the chat over there, wanting to know where you're going on your next trip, whether it's business or pleasure. Where are you off to next? As Cody said, Bob and I are going to be chatting about SRE, that's Site Reliability Engineering, and VSM, Value Stream Management today. Little talk map for you. We're going to talk initially about Site Reliability Engineering as strategy. Then we're going to talk about efficiency versus effectiveness, and perhaps. Then we'll move on to customer satisfaction and experience and how this relates to the SRE. And then we'll talk about the missing link, VSM. We will be taking questions throughout the chat live, so pop them in there wherever you like, in the chat or in the Q&A. Either's good. We will see them there. And today we are going to kick off with a poll, and our poll is going to go live. Oh, it's gone live already. Our poll is asking, how long have you been an SRE? And your options are 1 day, less than a month, less than 6 months, less than a year, less than 3 years, or forever, or I'm not an SRE. And if you're not an SRE, we'd love you to put in the chat what you are. So that is polling at the moment, and we will come back to that in a minute. But while we're waiting for that, Bob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you think about site reliability engineering?
You bet, Helen. And first of all, it's great to be here. And thanks all of you for attending. It's a great topic. I love this topic. It's the notion of where SRE is going, labeled or stacked on top of VSM, value stream management. It's just a great topic. As CMO of Plutora, we've been involved in value stream management now for, really 4 or 5 years. And to see it evolve and really start to take into account everything from not just idea to cash, but well into production and really embrace what the SREs can bring to the party. And I look forward to this discussion. It's going to be great, Helen.
Me too. Let's find out who we've got in the audience then. So we've got people coming in from all over the place, but Cody, wonderful. Thank you very much. So we've got quite a few people that are not SREs, 47%, and yet they have not put in the chat what they are. So this is your opportunity now to tell us who you are. Application support we have out there as well. Next, we've got SRE, 16% been SRE less than 3 years, 16% less than a year, 11% just 1 day. So quite a few of you new to the role and no doubt trying to get some info on what to do. So hopefully we'll help you up with that today. No one forever. It is a relatively new job role, of course.
Yes.
Thanks to Google. Got a cloud strategist out there as well. So lovely. We've got an understanding. Oh, someone from Cameroon as well. So I can see here we've got Toronto, Athens, Cameroon, Sofia in Bulgaria, Italy, all over the world. So thanks for joining us, everyone.
Great audience.
Amazing. So we've got a few different job roles. So let's talk about where some of these things fit together. So here we're talking about ITIL and ITSM, sort of ITIL being the registered trademark originating from the UK government, and ITSM, IT Service Management, DevOps, and SRE. So let's talk first, Bob. Does SRE, in your opinion, replace ITIL and ITSM?
You know, I think that the notion of SRE is taking on a much broader perspective than what ITIL and ITSM was originally thinking about. So I think there's an element that's replacing, but it's going so far beyond that. I mean, we started with, the notion of command and control, the idea of problem and incident management, keeping things running. But now you see the SRE individuals out there as the face to the customer. They're talking to the customer. Their environments have changed from not just infrastructure of systems, but SLAs and what have you to other vendors, bringing in SaaS-oriented solutions, tying all that together, making sure it's working well together and delivering the value that the customers are expecting, whether it's uptime or capability. And that takes them, I'll see your ITSM and I'll raise you this whole notion of customer satisfaction. And I think that's a significant nuance to what's happening with SREs.
So SRE almost like an iteration or an evolution of ITSM in that sense, which is interesting because I quite often talk about value stream management being the next generation of DevOps or the next evolution. So where do you see value stream management fitting into this picture?
Well, value stream management ultimately, it brings so much to the party. The way of thinking about value stream management from the sense of looking at a value stream, at the process of delivering software, bringing value to the customer. Value stream management takes that entire thing into account and looks at all the information that's flowing back and forth, the teams, the capabilities, the activities that are value added, that are adding code, the activities that are supporting that, like security and so forth. These things all come in, and value stream management has a great bird's eye view. We talk about it at Plutora like a catwalk above the factory floor. Well, with that kind of view, the insights are incredible. What we have here now is taking, SRE engineers who are sitting in production, they can participate with that same perspective, that same view of the entire value stream. And that insight, taking advantage of value stream management ways of working and thinking, plugging that into the pretty powerful view that the SREs have of the value being delivered and used by the customers, tying that together ensures a tremendous amount of benefit to the organizations that are instituting this, that we'll be talking about making the flow more effective, understanding where problems might exist, but also being able to add insight into what the value is that is actually being delivered and whether it's meeting the needs of those customers, meeting their expectations or not. Tying that all together, it just is another way to continuously improve what companies and organizations are delivering from the standpoint of value in their software. And that is what value stream management is all about, is optimizing that value. So it's a perfect marriage, taking advantage of those ways of thinking and then taking advantage of the perfect view that the SREs have of the actual value where the rubber meets the road. It's great.
And you mentioned effectiveness there. Out of these three, which ones kind of lean towards or prioritize efficiency and which ones lean towards effectiveness?
I think DevOps, starting in the middle, we've talked a lot about ITSM and SRE. I think if we think about DevOps, I see DevOps as really being looking closely at effectiveness. We're looking at the velocity of the CI/CD, the delivery factory. We're looking at the quality, which is really just saying, okay, of the things I'm delivering, and I'm delivering them as quickly and as efficiently as I can, are those things of high quality? Are the incidents within the margins that I would expect? But it doesn't have a value statement on whether or not the actual capability is exactly what the customer wants, which is where we start to get into effectiveness. And so the DevOps is really more about efficiency from my perspective, as is ITIL and ITSM. If we look at those, we're looking at really defending production, making sure that production is working, is running, and the infrastructure is capable of supporting the software that's being delivered. and that it's being done according to the SLOs and SLAs that are in place. And that's a notion of efficiency. Again, it doesn't really take into account the happiness quotient of the customer, if that's what we're measuring in the sense of, is the value they're getting out of the package of capabilities that are being delivered with that software, is it meeting their needs? The SRE is sitting there in the catbird seat, the face of the customer. That's where, initially it was about incident management, keeping things working. But they have a really great view of what's going on, what trends are happening, what issues are coming up more and more. And that capability starts to get into effectiveness. They also are sitting there looking to the customer and saying, okay, are we delivering? Are we delivering what you expect? So they start to see things like, are the practices and capabilities that the customers are using, are they meeting their needs? And that combined with that quality and effective delivery is where effectiveness comes in. I think the SRE is in the best shape to have that view of effectiveness.
Yeah, I'm pretty much aligned to that. I think, ITIL, ITSM about risk, DevOps about throughput and stability, site reliability about reliability, obviously, but actually so closely connected is customer experience. And that really moves us into the effectiveness space, as you say. Before we drill down into that, we do already have a few questions from the audience to address. Thank you, wonderful audience. So starting with, how would you compare and contrast a cloud architect versus an SRE? So for me, the cloud architect is obviously architecting cloud. So they're planning what it's going to look like from an infrastructure topology perspective, thinking about things like security and scalability and elasticity at kind of the front end. Whereas the site reliability engineer, for me, is more learning from the wisdom of production. They are heavily involved in incident management, probably a little bit too much. They have a job to automate toil. They kind of spend 50% of their time on admin and 50% coding stuff to help with the infrastructure. What else would you add to that comparison, Bob?
I think, one of the things that you said that really, that I think of a lot when I think of the SREs, they're the ones that have that face to the customer. I mentioned it before. So as they look to that customer function, capability, they're really bringing in that human element, that customer satisfaction. They're looking at the kind of metrics that are going to start to say, are these customers using the services we're offering, and are they going to be growing and taking more advantage? Do we have a real partnership here? That's kind of where that SRE starts to really focus, not just making sure the system is working and the error or the incident that came up is fixed, but going beyond that. They are that face to the customer. And I think that takes them, into a place that, so a cloud architect or an application developer is benefiting from that, but not spending their day focused on that. So it's a nice complementary relationship. And I think that's, what I see when I look at those comparisons.
Yeah, definitely need to be working hand in hand on that.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, it's all about team. Everything's about teams anyway. This is all about, teamwork. What we have is that value stream is driven by a team that's focused on delivering that value to the customer, covering all kinds of positions from idea to cash to well into production. And the SRE is a critical component of that teamwork. So the collaboration is key, and the value stream management way of thinking really fosters that. And I think that's another point to just remind ourselves that that's where this connection really is powerful.
Absolutely. And you mentioned metrics there, so I wanted to pick them out of this table that you and I prepared, comparing the then and the now of SRE, so how it felt when it sort of started and how it feels now, and how ITSM and ITIL has moved as well, or how it moves into the SRE world. So you talked about that customer face, that engagement and collaboration with the customer. How do SLOs and SLOs and SLIs help with that day-to-day management of customer experience?
Look, I think, the thing that strikes me when we think of then and now here is, in the then period, back when I was, earlier in my career, that whole group, that ITSM, those folks, they were they were focused and dedicated on the infrastructure. They were the protectors of that infrastructure. And it was largely on premises. It was largely in their data centers. And it was largely stuff they had control over. And they were, the budget was all them. It was capital and it was all that stuff. And let's make sure that we don't break anything when we roll out these capabilities. And the software rollouts were relatively infrequent. So the focus, my goodness, 50% of the time was rebooting Exchange servers. So it was just like, that's how they focused. And now they're looking at a customer. They're the point where those phone calls, those questions, those clarifications are coming in from customers, but they're not just using that infrastructure. Now they're using, they might be using a cloud service from a public cloud provider. They might be using a CRM capability from somebody like Salesforce. Many of their applications and systems that they're using to run their business are being brought in and intermingled into a hybrid environment that the SRE is responsible for making sure is working together, that the dependencies are clean, that the value is being delivered, and that the quality and frequency with which people are enhancing their customer experience is keeping up. And that's a whole different view than just making sure that my Exchange server is running. So that customer experience is, we hear about it all the time now. CX engineers, the whole notion of customer experience, its role in the creation of even things like value stream management. Customer experience is key. And the SRE is in that chair looking at the customer, owning that customer experience rather than just owning the infrastructure. That's still part of their job. They still get into that incident management, but it goes way beyond that.
We've got a couple of questions from one of the audience members, which I think quite nicely actually and succinctly explains that differentiation that you were making. The first question is, can SREs maintain high reliability and availability for software applications and respond to incidents as they occur? And absolutely, that's the hope for the role. That's the fundamental part. So that's the fixing of the Exchange servers that Bob was talking about. But the second question, with SRE, can we streamline and automate as many operations as possible to remove opportunities for human error? That's the next part, I think, Bob, that you were talking about. Yeah. So that quite succinctly summarizes that in just 2 seconds.
Yeah. You talk a lot about removing or automating toil, and I think that plays hand in glove with that as well, right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Another couple of rows on this table I wanted us to talk about. One is the design. So in the past, we've pretty much predominantly had centralized IT operations. And with SRE, one of the things I've really sympathized with organizations actually is that it's quite difficult to know what the organizational design is for SRE. It's quite variable. Google themselves have several SRE implementations. They've got like the kitchen sink, also known as everything SRE, where there's an SRE team where the scope of services and workflows is usually unbounded. Then they've got an infrastructure version, a tools version, a product application, have them embedded in teams using DevOps team terminology, which is, I do the quotation because I don't really think we should have DevOps teams, but we have teams that practice DevOps, and consulting SRE as well. So what do you think, Bob, in terms of the variability of these team topologies or team designs that we can have for SRE?
It speaks to the notion behind everything we're talking about, and that is the complexities of the role, the importance of the role, and the complexities that are not only about a stronger remit to customer satisfaction, as we've discussed, but the complexities associated with the technologies that are coming together in a melting pot of capability that's driving value to the customer. Where, in the centralized case, we might have in the basement of our high-rise building, the service desk, is lower priority. It's kind of like, let's just keep the machines running. Now we have people that are out in the front lines dealing with all the various aspects of what, is delivering value. And I think just speaks to the importance of the role, the need to focus and specialize on key areas that are being done within these complex software development capabilities. And I think it's part and parcel to the whole notion of autonomous. Everything is going autonomous teams, developers being remote, value streams being significant and containing lots of dependencies, I think the SRE is part of that same equation, and I think that's what we're seeing. It's what it appears to me. Is that how you see it, Helen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this links really closely to the conversation we had about funding and how this other thing is moving, in that when we were treated like cost centers, order takers, everything was about productivity. All of the investment cases were built around productivity. CTOs and CIOs would arrive and they'd be asked how they could reduce the costs of the IT department by 10%. And that would normally meant kind of trying to streamline and remove people. Whereas as we've become more strategic, as software has eaten the world, and people like SRE are seen to be so important for keeping our digital infrastructure running, optimizing, out-competing the competition, we're understanding that we should look at these business units, or look at them as business units, strategic business units, and actually judge them by how much capacity we can inject via improvement.
And that's a really interesting point, because I think, as we talk to companies that are evaluating the kinds of tools and process changes they might be making as they evolve their software delivery and their transformation efforts, and they look at justifying or selling, if you will, up to the organization on the value of moving in these directions. A lot of times the metrics that are being used to determine whether something is approved or not is really driven on pretty short-term productivity gains. The ROI, how many FTEs does this cost? What's the incremental efficiency gains we'll get if we save 30% of these, individuals' time? And while those are important, and I certainly understand the need to care about that stuff, the real value of implementing some of these things, as you point out here, the capacity, what's the value of doubling the number of user stories that are being delivered to production without touching production more often? So I'm not thrashing my customers, but I'm adding more capabilities. That's capacity is invaluable, and could be the difference between a competitive stronghold and a challenger, and also ran from the standpoint of competitive posture. That's the kind of mindset that, as we evaluate how we evolve here, we need to kind of evaluate how we approve and manage things. And again, the SRE is right there on the front line, can really speak to where some of these advances are really going to change, be in, major inflection points in how customer experience has improved in a particular organization, when we embrace this and bring all these points of view together in this, in this kind of way. So I think this is a great point.
And if I just rewind you about a minute, I think one of the kind of alignments that you made is productivity is kind of about efficiency, and capacity is, but it also opens that conversation about effectiveness. So let's just level set here for a minute. What do we mean, Bob, when we say these words, and do we use them enough in business?
I think we use them a lot, but we don't always use them with a high degree of discipline. So we sometimes use them and we don't really mean exactly what they mean. So, for example, I think efficacy is the notion of doing something right, is like doing it with the highest amount of value that meets the needs of what you're delivering. I'm going to do this the right way. I'm going to deliver the value that is exactly what the market needs in this particular context. Efficiency is whatever I'm delivering it well. I'm delivering it quickly. I'm delivering it when I expect it to be delivered. I'm delivering it from the standpoint of efficiency in a monetary sense. So I'm not wasting money. I'm not wasting time. That's efficiency. And even the quality components within that speak to with the payload of features that I'm delivering. Am I delivering it quickly? And is the quality within the measures I would expect for my software? But effectiveness is adding both those together. So in other words, if I'm delivering things quickly and economically and predictably, but the value that's being delivered is missing the mark, and the customers are finding reasons not to continue with it because it's not doing the job they really want, it doesn't matter how quickly it's come out. I need to do it right. I need to do it with a high degree of efficiency. And when I do that, now I'm effective. I'm delivering things economically. I'm delivering things quickly. I'm delivering things when I expect them to be delivered. They're of high quality, and the features and capabilities being delivered are meeting the needs of my customers. And that's where effectiveness really, really drives. That's how I see those. We talk about efficiency and flow a lot. We don't talk as much about the efficacy, and that's where value stream management is really focused on, really saying, okay, can I not just look at how quickly things are going through, but the value, assign what I'm being delivered and measure it against what I was expecting, what the customers were expecting, and what my strategic goals of the company were. That's where you want to go, and that's where effectiveness really drives.
So do you think that most people assume there's some kind of trade-off between these things? Or do you think that teams and organizations tend to focus on one more than the other?
I think it's, I think it's more the latter would be what I would conclude. That I think people think there's a trade-off between quickly and quality. If I do things quickly, the quality might start to decay, but we're still dealing with efficiency. And I think that's a lot of the give and take that I see with people when we talk to them, is they want to do things fast, but they want to make sure the incidents that are in production are held within, a reasonable measure. That's not the discussion of, well, did it meet the needs of the business? And I think some of the metrics and capabilities that really shine a light on that have been slower to come to the market than those metrics and capabilities that address simple flow. And I think part of it is the insights haven't been there to say, okay, when I released this set of features, when I released this capability to the customers, did the customer satisfaction do what I expected? Did the forecast that sales had do what it's expected? Did the cost controls that were expected to be in place with this release, did they occur? Tying that back to the value, that's the piece that's needed to be able to really understand the level of efficacy I've got. Anecdotally, the SRE is there watching this happen. So they have tremendous insight into what's going on, and they can facilitate that process. But I don't think it's because there's a trade-off. I think it's because it's newer, it's harder to do, and it's part of the it's a part of the transformation effort that people are struggling with, quite frankly.
Let's go dark a little bit then and talk about what people are struggling with and talk about what happens when we get this wrong. So I think we kind of agreed efficacy plus efficiency equals effectiveness. But here we've just got effective and efficient looking against each other. So what is the consequence of pursuing the wrong goals and being inefficient? Where do we end up?
Well, I think this is such a great thing, because if I take kind of an extreme view, to where if I'm either being efficient, I'm either achieving the goals from an efficacy point of view, value really, or they're not at all. So I'm delivering the wrong things really quickly. Feels to me like a race to failure. So if I just keep pouring, very efficient, but it's the wrong goal, so I'm in the lower right there. So I'm being very efficient, but I'm not, the goals I have are disconnected from what's really required. My insight into what our customers want is not there. The level of corroboration and collaboration across the value stream is broken. I'm not getting the kind of insight from the SREs or from the metrics in production, but I'm really fast at delivering software out the door. It's just it's a race to failure.
Bottom. Yeah.
You know, if I'm effective, I'm delivering the right goals, but I'm inefficient, that feels to me, you know, that's a little bit more of a potential. If that's your final state, that's terrible, because you're basically going to be praised for having the right vision, but you won't be able to make a business out of it because you're going to be just so ineffective. So it's going to cost you more to deliver what you're delivering, and you're likely going to be slow. And so you're going to be behind the market. You're not going to be able to respond to customers as quickly as you might. But it's also a state that I think, as you are powering up your dev, if you're a startup or you're delivering a new product in a new part of the organization, if you're a big company, you might get into the point where your focus is, I want to get the goals right. Once I know the goals right, so I'm doing A/B testing, I'm trying some things, I'm probably not as worried that I'm as efficient as I could be. I'm more interested in getting, you know, an understanding of the goals. But boy, once I have a sense of that, I better move to the upper right, or I simply won't be able to scale my business and hit the needs that I'm creating. And oftentimes, you know, one of the things as a marketing person we would always say is, you know, the worst thing you can do is get the market excited about a new capability and a new feature that your company is going to deliver, and then not be able to meet the demand that you created because you've just done a bunch of marketing for your competitors. So while it's good to move and understand the right goals, you really need to make sure you get to that efficient point, or you won't be able to scale, and basically you're creating a market for your competitors. So that's, you know, that's kind of, I see that upper left as more of an interim step. I see the lower right as kind of a failure step. And if you're just, I've got the wrong goals, but I'm delivering it slowly, I'm not sure I have any redeeming qualities at all there. I mean, that's where you don't want to be.
So flow is about efficiency, value realization is about effectiveness. What is it, Bob, about value stream ways of working in platforms that enables teams to be better at balancing these two things?
I think value stream management, if you think about it, it starts with this whole notion of mapping, and I'm not going to go through the adoption, you know, paradigm in detail, but you start with the notion of mapping, and you start with the notion of connecting, you know, the dots and having visibility across the software factory. Having that catwalk across a factory gives you a real sense of where your bottlenecks are, gives you a sense of where wait states are, gives you a sense of where non-value added capabilities and shared capabilities might be holding you up. So it really gives you a bird's eye view into what's going on from an efficiency point of view. But as it has evolved, it also, in its ways of thinking and its notion of what it's delivering, is connecting to the value that's actually being delivered. We get asked all the time, is can I trace what's being released to customers back to the original strategic goals that the company set about? And so, you know, and now with, I mean, there's evidence from acquisitions and the industry. There's evidence as we look at reports coming out from some of our favorite, you know, analysts, that customer experience and understanding that value is connecting the planning, the portfolio management capability, the agile planning, connecting that to what's going on in release and having visibility into what is actually getting out into the customer hands. And that's really what the value stream management conversation becomes. That's where the realization is, where I can tie events in production, value being delivered to customers, value being used over time by customers, tying that back to the capabilities that I'm investing in from a company point of view, the priorities and capabilities that I'm investing in from a corporate point of view, and saying, okay, when I invest in those, am I moving the needle in my business in the way I would expect, whether it's profit, whether it's revenue, whether it's cost control, whatever it is, whatever that customer wants, am I moving that? That's key. So I can have a check and balance on the value being delivered while I have this incredible catwalk view of the efficiency of the value stream, and that's value stream thinking. And so I apply it to this with the value realization. I leverage the SRE, who's got a bird's eye view of what's going on with the customer, and I've really got a nice solution here to be able to manage both flow and value realization.
So let's ask the audience how they're doing in terms of focusing on flow or realization. So the poll is live, audience. The question is, do you focus more on flow or realization? And the answers you can choose from are: we focus more on flow, we focus more on value realization, we focus equally on both, we only focus on flow, we only focus on value realization, or we don't focus on either. So what do you think the results of this poll are likely to be, Bob? I'm sure you won't bias the answer by talking about it while they're voting.
I think it's going to be skewed towards measuring flow. I think people will measure flow. I think there's been a lot of discussion about flow and flow metrics. I think there's a lot of that. I think people will be measuring, leaning towards flow. That's what I would expect. A little less on not measuring anything, and probably measuring efficiency. Value realization and effectiveness might be pretty low.
Let's have a look. So, can you see that on the screen? No, let me, maybe Cody can help me. Cody, perfect, thanks. Oh, thank you, Cody. Didn't know how to do that, but so let's have a look at the actual results. So our highest answer is actually people focusing equally on both. So that's quite good news, isn't it? That people are actually managing to make those connections. But the next one is we don't do it at all. And no, sorry, is it still running? Maybe it's still running, so those numbers are changing. But we have got the highest number saying they're focusing on both. Then we focus more on flow, and then we don't focus on either. And let me just close that so it doesn't confuse me with changing the numbers. So yeah, a little bit of a surprise there, because I did think we only focus more on flow, and we focus more on flow would be the highest there. We've got 27% across those, whereas we've got 24% leaning towards value realization, and the whopping majority focusing on both. So that's good news. Although I wonder how much, as we go forward, we'll discover whether people are really doing that. So let's carry on and see what happens. So let's talk about the purpose of doing this and what it means in the SRE world. So first of all, Bob, and I've got my eye on the clock, actually. We're coming up to about 20 minutes left, so we probably need to step it up a little bit. Okay, so first of all, what is unplanned work?
Well, just that. Things that are coming in, whether it's from incidents, whether it's from infrastructure that's breaking, whether it's from any request that's coming in to modify the code you delivered, that you weren't expecting, has to be folded into your overall process, and eats away at time that you would normally be spending doing other things, like, for example, value creation. So it really gets in the way.
Yeah. Can you plan for it? Is there anything you can do knowing unplanned things are going to happen? Planning for unplanned work?
Well, you can, and I think that people have been doing development for a good long while. Well before DevOps. I think people do. They plan as a percent of their day, or their week, or their project time. They can work in and plan for things and say, okay, well, I'm only gonna be able to do value creation this amount of time, because I know that I'm gonna have unplanned work coming in. I'm just going to plan for it, and that helps from the standpoint of setting expectations, so that I'm not promising a delivery schedule that is then interrupted by unplanned work taking up too much of my time. If I plan correctly, and I have kind of a history of, well, it runs at about 10, 20, 30%, whatever it is, I can plan that in, and I can make that go. But, you know, that's kind of like planning for failure. It helps with expectations, but it really doesn't help me deliver better code. It doesn't help my team. It just helps the expectations of what people might expect above me or from a customer delivery point of view. But it isn't solving the real problem.
But it helps us solve the real problem, because if we measure it and we know how much of it we're dealing with, and then we do things to try and reduce it in order. So here, unplanned work is basically incident and infrastructure management, or I&I management on the right, because we didn't have enough room to write the whole thing out. Because what we're showing is that the more that we reduce unplanned work, the more time we create, more capacity we create for value creation and learning and mastery, which is going to put us in a stronger competitive position longer term. And the more we pay down that technical debt and the toil, the more unplanned work we're going to actually remove in the future as well. So that's quite exciting from an SRE point of view. It helps us to justify those improvements. The amount of times that I've heard people say they can't find the time to save time. If I had £1 for every time I heard that, I would be retired by now. Yeah. But let's look at this as well. So I think we've established that SRE is now the face of the customer. That used to be the support desk, this kind of old hierarchical pyramid that we used to have. And this isn't a hierarchical pyramid, but it got me thinking about pyramids. Used to be flipped. We've now got SRE kind of at the top. But what's interesting about this is the service reliability hierarchy from Google, is it really shows us why value stream management and product and SRE all fit together. So what do you see when you look at this, Bob?
Well, I see, I see the hierarchy of all the capabilities that live in the software factory folding right up underneath the value stream that's driven by the product or service that is ultimately the goal of the organization. And tying that together with that level of hierarchy is very powerful. And in the last few years, as we've talked about things like value stream management, we typically see that product and the development with testing and all that running down, but we haven't had that many conversations up until these conversations about things below that postmortem. So we worry about root cause analysis and we worry about that, but we didn't have a lot of discussions about incident response and monitoring. I love the way that brings in that, some of the core capabilities of SRE and brings it right into that whole product value stream. So this, to me, is saying, hey, let's not just get focused on the monitoring and incident stuff, but let's really drive all the way up into the strategic elements of what's driving that value stream, that product. And I think that's really powerful. That's what this says to me.
So we asked a few other people, members of the VSMC and people connected to the VSM industry, how they felt about this relationship between VSM value stream management and SRE as well. And this is Patrice Corbard. And he said this, he's got all of those activities in the VSM cycle SRE is connected with. So map and deliver, measure, improve, and govern. What's he talking about when he talks about mapping there? I know you mentioned it briefly earlier, but should we just go on to that for a minute or two?
Well, I think so. When I see this, I look at it and I say, okay, we talk to customers. One of the very first things we do, we sit down and they're looking at value streams, they're looking at digital transformation, they're looking at getting better and faster and more effective and efficient at delivering their software. A value stream mapping exercise is often, one of the things that happen, and it's the first thing a lot of people do, and it's a continual thing that people do. It's the idea of saying, okay, I'm gonna connect all the capabilities from idea to cache to production to post-production. I'm going to connect all those things, and I'm going to get the insights. I'm going to get the perspectives, and I'm going to understand my process of delivery at its at every detail. What this is saying is that the SRE has insight and value at every step of the way. That it isn't just talk to me about incident management and what are you seeing on the monitoring, but based on what you're seeing, how can we inject or map that insight into every step of the value stream management cycle. And that's what I see Patrice saying, is that there's value they're bringing at every step. So don't get bogged down in just fixing technology, but let's talk strategically about how we make a better organization.
Absolutely. I'm pretty aligned with Patrice's view on this. This is kind of my 2 pennies worth on it as well. And I think when we ask the question, where isn't an SRE important? The answer is nowhere. They're important everywhere. And what I smiled a little wryly to myself when we were asked the cloud architect question earlier, knowing that this piece was going to come up here. So this is another view of the value stream, starting with portfolio and backlog, moving through continuous integration, testing and delivery, and finishing with the insights analysis that then feed back into backlog. But right up here, we've got the SRE having involvement in creating that architecture, that cloud architecture, and working with the team to ensure that non-functional requirements are included in as well, that do things like assure importance. So what other things jump out at you, Bob, here?
Well, I think, what jumps out, in the interest of time, what jumps out to me is the influence where the SRE is bringing it in to where the vision and goals are being set right at the beginning of the value stream. The influence on how the strategy of the organization is going to change based on what's being seen in the customer experience, getting that feedback directly to the people making, decisions on what the next strategic goal is, what are the initiatives of the company, how can we achieve them, how can we better achieve them. The SRE has information and insight, both measured and anecdotal, that they can bring into that equation and really drive improvements in how products and portfolios are being put together and built. And continuous improvement is the name of the game. And I think that that's a very critical component, having them involved in production and incidents. That's more expected. That's kind of where they came from. But this diving into the strategy, I think that's a really important point. And I think that makes them a very powerful component of the strategic initiatives of the organization.
Absolutely. And just reflecting on a couple of other comments from members about the relationship between these two things. One person said, in my experience, I found SREs to be very tech focused, possibly at the detriment of important concepts like value streams and flow, which was similar to what they saw with DevOps. But when they come together, it's like a captain planet and where the value is. Do you agree with that, Bob, that there's a tendency for SREs and DevOps people to be a bit too much tech focused?
Totally. I mean, I think, the heritage of that organization was answering the phones and managing a help desk and fixing problems. So, I mean, it's in the DNA to be helpful. I mean, that's part of why you take those jobs. You want to be helpful. You like helping people get over issues. It's real easy to get sucked into that because it's comfortable. And I think that has been true in my experience as well. And I think as they start to apply that outside of that, I mean, I love what he says here. It's Captain Planet, and that's where the value is. I mean, it really comes together when you bring that perspective of an SRE into that development process earlier, like we were just saying. I think that's very powerful. Totally agree with this.
What can we do, or what needs to happen to help these people lock on to VSM, do you think?
I think is part of it is awareness. I don't know. I think understanding VSM and seeing the value that VSM can actually bring to their world, the awareness of how I can plug into this, the understanding of what VSM really is bringing. The market in general is learning about VSM. VSM is relatively new. I think that the SREs remit relative to customer experience is relatively new. The fact that there are tools that can, and ways of thinking and working that have been built kind of in parallel that can be applied perfectly to this capability is a sense of awareness that I think is the first thing that we can do. I think that there are other things that the Value Stream Management Consortium can do relative to tying together the SRE capability and understanding how the metrics might evolve and best practices in doing things. I think there's a lot of the training and understanding, but the very first thing is awareness. Honestly, I think that's something that we need to do more of, and that's why this webinar was so exciting to me.
Yeah. That second quote, reliability is the key criteria for customers. If you don't have a reliable service, you cannot maximize customer value. So there's definitely a connection there with SREs helping to guide the value streams to take on work that improves reliability and achievement of SLOs. So this begs the question then, Bob, what is a value stream without an SRE? What does that look like?
I think a value stream without a view towards the customer experience in as complete a way as possible is missing the boat. And I think that you undermine the true deliverability, the true promise of what value stream management can bring to an organization by not having that piece. I think it's a critical component. So, without that SRE piece, you could get better at flow. You could get better at being more efficient. But if you remember our quadrants with, doing things really fast, but not necessarily with the right goals and value in mind, I think that's where you end up if you don't have the SRE strength on your team in this particular manner. I think that's where you end up in that lower right section of that quadrant we were showing earlier.
So tell us all about these challenges that value stream management solves.
Well, I think, this is really looking at a summary of what we've been talking about. Value stream management at its core is this holistic view of the value stream, of the software delivery process from idea to cash. And the reason it's required is there's been lots of issues as development has evolved, as development technologies have evolved, as DevOps and agile ways of thinking have really taken hold. There's all sorts of challenges, and that's what value stream management does, is solve these challenges of visibility across a pipeline so I can see things going on from idea to cash, visibility across multiple portfolios, because there are dependencies as much as we don't want there to be. There definitely are dependencies, particularly in some of the organizations we deal with that are, hundreds of years old, in many cases have lots of different kinds of technologies. There's going to be dependencies as they go through their transformation. And, they have multiple technologies as well. They've got a lot of legacy systems. This is the world that the SRE lives in at the customer side. This has often been described as the world that the development teams live in from a build side. But as you go on the right-hand side of this picture, you see production. And that insight is where we've been talking about. So we basically took that little button of production and blew it up for this conversation and said, the insights and capability those guys can bring can be fed back into this entire, image here of all the various releases that are going, whether it's a quick fix, a Sev 1, or a major rewrite of an infrastructure capability. That insight on that little bubble to the right, it blows up into being massive. I think that that's what value stream management has always promised to be, and the role of SRE fitting in is what we've been trying to explain. And I think when you look at like the next slide, you start to see the architecture of our platform, just as an example. You've got the capabilities there, and you see, what would be a typical value stream management platform with the integrations on the bottom. It's a 3-layer cake. We talk about it a lot. People that watch Plutora webinars see this all the time. But if I'm connecting on the bottom to all the tools that exist in the value stream, I'm now connecting to things that, SIEM dashboards and monitoring capabilities are all part of that. They're in that, that lower right-hand bubble. And having that information feed up, giving me the orchestration capabilities to do the kinds of modifications to flow and get efficient, and then drive the insights and metrics to improve, tie it to value, tie it to efficiency, get all those things working. That's what we do. This is what underpins all the capabilities we've had, and that's what we try to provide. Is that catwalk across the production floor and the software delivery factory, and now we're adding in that real focus to show just how critical the SRE capability is to pull this in. So that's where we are.
Beautiful. So some key takeaways. You absolutely don't have to choose between efficiency and effectiveness. You can have both. And SREs are accountable for both these things, efficiency and customer experience, efficacy and effectiveness. And we really don't think you can hope to optimize customer experience without the SRE. That person is now, or those teams are the face of the customer. And then these things are not mutually exclusive. so you can get them together. So we've not got any more questions today. So I think we can hand back to Cody to finish up.
Well, Helen and Bob, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today and to share your expertise. I would like to remind our audience that this session was recorded. So if you happen to miss any of our discussion, you should be receiving an email with a link to watch the recording on demand. You can also find the recording living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and just be sure to look in the on-demand section. So on to the 4 winners of our Amazon gift card drawing. Our first winner is Ashley J. Our second winner is Weston N. Our third winner is Patrick C. And our fourth and final winner is Paul P. So to the 4 of you, congratulations. Please keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, please check your spam folder. I would like to thank Plutora for sponsoring today's webinar. And before we close, to our audience, thank you for being here with us. We do ask for 1 extra moment of your time to fill out a brief post-webinar survey, but otherwise, we do hope to see you at an upcoming Techstrong Learning workshop or webinar. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. And Helen, Bob, thank you both so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Helen. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Bob.